Welcome back. Your home is supposed to be your sanctuary, the one place in the world where you can lock the doors and feel completely safe from everything outside. But what happens when that safety is just an illusion? What happens when the threat isn't trying to get in, but is already inside with you, moving through the shadows of the place you know best? Tonight, we have 3 stories from people who found themselves in that exact terrifying situation, completely and utterly alone. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I'm always curious to see how far these stories travel into the night. I work from home as a medical transcriptionist, a job that requires intense focus and a very quiet environment. My house, a small bungalow in a sleepy part of Sacramento, California, is usually the perfect place for it. Most days are a peaceful, predictable routine of typing, coffee, and silence. But one afternoon in late summer of 2024, that peace was shattered by a man at my front door, a man whose visit would unravel into a night of absolute terror. It was around 2 in the afternoon, and I was deep in concentration, trying to finish a difficult file before my deadline. The doorbell rang, a jarring sound that broke my focus. Annoyed at the interruption, I went to the door and opened it a few inches, leaving the security chain on. A man I'd never seen before was standing on my porch. He was middle-aged, with thinning hair and a forced, overly friendly smile. He was dressed in a cheap-looking polo shirt and khakis. "Can I help you?" I asked, my tone probably a little colder than necessary. "Hi there. I'm looking for Mr. Peterson," he said, his smile widening. "Ben Peterson. My name is Ben Peterson." A knot of unease tightened in my stomach. I didn't recognize him from the neighborhood, and he didn't look like a delivery person. "That's me," I said cautiously. "What's this about?" His eyes lit up. "Great. I have some very important information I need to discuss with you. It's of a sensitive nature. Could I come inside for a moment so we can talk in private?" His request was so bizarre and forward that it immediately set off alarm bells in my head. There was something off about his demeanor, an intensity behind the friendly facade that made my skin crawl. "I'm not interested," I said flatly. "If you have something to tell me, you can say it right here." His smile faltered for just a second. "I'm afraid I can't do that. It really is a private matter." "Then I can't help you," I said, and I started to close the door. "Have a good day." I shut it firmly, slid the deadbolt into place, and watched through the peephole as he stood there for a moment, his smile gone, replaced by a blank expression. Then he turned and walked off the porch and down the street. I waited until he was out of sight before I went back to my office, but my concentration was shot. The encounter was just too strange. Who was he? How did he know my full name? A few minutes later, the doorbell rang again, a series of short, insistent jabs. My heart jumped into my throat. I knew it was him. I ran back to the door and looked through the peephole. The porch was empty. I cautiously opened the door and looked out. The street was completely deserted. There was no sign of him or a car. It was like he had vanished into thin air. That was even more unsettling. It felt like a game, and I was an unwilling participant. For the rest of the afternoon, I felt like I was being watched. I kept glancing out the window, half expecting to see him standing across the street. I made sure every window and door was securely locked. The day ended and night fell. I tried to push the weird encounter out of my mind, telling myself it was probably just a strange salesman or a religious solicitor. I made dinner, watched some TV, and tried to relax, but the feeling of unease lingered. Around 10:30, I turned off the TV and was getting ready to head upstairs to bed when the doorbell rang again. A jolt of pure adrenaline shot through me. I knew, with absolute certainty, who it was. I turned off all the lights and crept to the front door, my heart hammering against my ribs. I slowly raised my eye to the peephole, and what I saw made my blood run cold. It was him. He was standing on my porch, bathed in the pale yellow light from the motion sensor light, but he was different now. He had changed out of the polo shirt and was wearing a dark hoodie pulled up over his head, and he was wearing a plain white featureless mask over his face. I could see he had something bulky tucked into the waistband of his jeans, the dark handle of either a large knife or a handgun. I stumbled back from the door, my mind reeling in terror. This wasn't a salesman. This person was here to hurt me. He rang the doorbell again, a long, demanding buzz. I could see through the peephole that he was growing impatient, shifting his weight from foot to foot. I backed away quietly, fumbling for my phone, and ran up the stairs, taking them two at a time. I locked myself in the master bathroom, the farthest room from the front door, and dialed 911. I was whispering frantically to the operator, trying to explain the situation, when an ear-splitting crack echoed through the house. It was a gunshot. The sound was so loud and sudden in the confines of the house that my ears immediately started ringing, a high-pitched whine that drowned out everything else. I couldn't even hear what the operator was saying anymore. A moment later, I heard the splintering crash of my front door being kicked open. He was inside. I dropped the phone, my body shaking uncontrollably. The ringing in my ears was so intense that I couldn't hear his footsteps. I had no idea where he was. Was he searching the downstairs? Was he already on his way up? The silence was terrifying. A vacuum of sound filled only by the whine in my ears and the frantic beating of my own heart. I braced myself against the bathroom door, waiting for the handle to turn, for the door to be kicked in. I was trapped. Those moments felt like an eternity. Then, through the ringing, I heard a new sound, a faint, distant wail that was slowly growing louder. Sirens. The operator must have dispatched the police immediately. The sound of the approaching sirens seemed to spur the intruder into action. I heard heavy, running footsteps from downstairs. I risked a look out of the small bathroom window, which overlooks the front lawn. Just as the first police car turned onto my street, its lights flashing wildly, I saw the man in the mask sprint out of my busted open front door. He ran across the lawn and vaulted the fence into my neighbor's yard, disappearing into the darkness just seconds before the police pulled up. I gave them a description of the man, but with the mask and generic clothing, there wasn't much to go on. He had shot the deadbolt clean off my front door. The police believe he was there to kill me, that the visit during the day was to confirm my identity, and that I was home alone. They don't know why I was targeted, and they never caught him. The fear I live with now is a permanent fixture in my life. He knows my name. He knows my face. He knows where I live. And until he's caught, I know I'll never truly feel safe again. I'm 25 now, but this happened last year, in the spring of 2024. I live alone in a small house I rent in a quiet, older neighborhood in a suburb of Cleveland. It's the kind of place where everyone keeps to themselves, and the nights are usually peaceful. I work as a veterinary technician, which means my days are often long, emotionally taxing, and physically demanding. On Friday nights, my only goal is to collapse on my couch, order some food, and watch a movie until I pass out. It was my decompression ritual. I never thought that this simple routine could turn into the most terrifying night of my life. That Friday had been particularly rough. We'd had a string of emergencies at the clinic, and I didn't get home until almost 8. I was completely exhausted. I ordered a pizza, changed into sweats, and settled onto my couch, pulling up a classic thriller on Netflix that I'd seen a dozen times. The predictability was comforting. The living room was dark, except for the flickering glow of the television screen. My couch is positioned directly across from a large picture window that looks out onto my front porch and the street. I rarely bothered to close the blinds, a lazy habit I would come to regret deeply. I must have dozed off sometime during the movie because I was startled awake by a sharp, unfamiliar notification sound from my phone, which was on the coffee table. Groggy and disoriented, I picked it up, squinting against the bright screen. It was a message notification from Facebook Messenger, an app I almost never used. The message was from a guy named Derek Miller. The name sounded vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place it. His profile picture was of a generic-looking guy in his late 20s, smiling on a boat. The message itself was simple, just one word: hey. Confused about why a practical stranger was messaging me so late, I clicked on his profile. It said we had one mutual friend, a girl I went to high school with but hadn't actually spoken to in nearly a decade. I have a bad habit of accepting friend requests from anyone as long as we have a friend in common. I never post anything too personal, so I never saw the harm in it. Thinking it was weird, but probably harmless, I replied with a polite, "Hi, do I know you?" I set the phone down, assuming I wouldn't get a reply until the morning. But my screen lit up instantly with the 3 little dots that indicated he was typing. A new message appeared a second later. Reading it made every hair on my body stand on end. It said, "Good movie choice." I always thought Clarice was brave. My blood turned to ice. He was talking about the movie I was watching, The Silence of the Lambs. There was only one way he could have known that. He was watching me. He was outside right now, looking through my window. I dropped my phone on the couch as if it were burning hot and scrambled off the cushions, my heart hammering in my throat. I crawled on the floor over to the edge of the window and peered through the small gap in the curtains. My front porch was empty. The street was dark and quiet, bathed in the orange glow of a single streetlight. I couldn't see anyone. My phone buzzed again on the couch. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely pick it up. A new message from Derek. "Don't be scared. I just want to talk." My mind was racing, trying to figure out how this was happening. How did he know where I lived? Then a horrible realization dawned on me. A few months ago, I had posted a picture of my new puppy sitting on the front steps. My house number was clearly visible on the post above the door. My address had been publicly available for anyone to see. Before I could even process that thought, the doorbell rang. It wasn't a quick press. It was a long, sustained buzz that echoed through the silent house. I let out a small, terrified gasp and backed away from the door, retreating toward the kitchen. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my voice a panicked whisper as I tried to explain to the dispatcher that a man was outside my house, that he'd been watching me, and that he knew my name. As I was on the phone, a rapid series of notifications came through, one after another, a relentless, terrifying stream of messages. "Open the door. I'm a nice guy, I promise. Let me in, Maya." Hearing him use my name made my stomach clench with fear. The dispatcher was telling me to stay on the line and lock myself in a room when the messages abruptly stopped. A final message came through that was more chilling than all the others. It just said, "Fine. There's more than one way in." A moment of terrifying silence followed. Then I heard a sound from the back of the house. A loud, metallic scraping noise. My house has one of those old-fashioned cellar doors on the outside. A pair of angled steel doors set into the ground that lead down to the basement. The scraping was followed by a loud bang, and then another. He was trying to break in. I told the dispatcher what was happening, and she assured me the police were on their way, but it felt like they were a world away. I could hear the man grunting with effort, punctuated by the horrible sound of metal striking metal. He was using something to pry the doors open. Then came a deafening crash as the lock gave way, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps descending the concrete steps into my basement. He was inside the house. I was in the kitchen, which was directly above the basement. I could hear him moving around down there, his footsteps echoing on the concrete floor. Then, the footsteps stopped right below me. The doorknob on the basement door, not 10 feet from where I was hiding behind the kitchen island, began to rattle violently. He started slamming his shoulder against the door. I could see the wood frame shake with each powerful impact. The old door was groaning, splintering. I was certain it was about to burst open. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable, when I heard the faint but unmistakable wail of sirens growing closer. The banging on the door stopped instantly. I heard his frantic footsteps running back across the basement floor. A moment later, the blinding flash of red and blue lights filled my kitchen windows as a police car screeched to a halt in my driveway. The relief was so overwhelming I nearly collapsed. 2 officers came to the front door, and I let them in, sobbing and babbling about the man in the basement. They found the cellar doors pried open with a crowbar, which he had left on the floor. They caught him, Derek, in the backyard as he was trying to climb my back fence. At the station, he was disturbingly calm. He admitted to developing an obsession with me after seeing my Facebook profile. He found my address from that one photo and had been driving by my house for weeks, watching my routine. That night, he said he had worked up the courage to finally introduce himself. The experience completely shattered my sense of security. I broke my lease and moved into a secure apartment building on the other side of town within a month. I deleted all of my social media accounts. It's a terrifying lesson to learn that the digital connections we make so casually can sometimes lead a very real danger right to our front door. It was October of 2023, and I was 16 years old. My parents had decided to go away for a long weekend to celebrate their 20th wedding anniversary, leaving me home alone for the first time ever. I put on a good show for them, acting all responsible and a little sad to see them go. But on the inside, I was ecstatic. The entire house to myself for 3 whole days. No one to tell me to clean my room, no one to tell me to turn down my music, and most importantly, no one to tell me to go to bed. They left on a Friday morning, and as soon as I got home from school, my weekend of freedom officially began. I dumped my backpack by the front door, grabbed a bag of chips and a soda, and set up camp in the living room. My plan was simple: play video games online with my friends for as long as my eyes could stay open. Our house was at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac in suburban New Jersey, a safe, boring neighborhood where nothing ever happened. I felt completely secure. I played for hours, completely lost in the world of online shooters. My friends and I were laughing and shouting through our headsets, having a great time. But one by one, their parents called them for dinner or told them to get off the game. And by about 10 o'clock, I was the only one left online. That's when my neighbor's dog started barking. This wasn't just any dog. It was a huge German shepherd named Rocky, and he had a deep, intimidating bark. He almost never barked, so when he did, you knew something was up. Tonight, he wasn't just barking. He was going insane. It was a continuous, frantic, aggressive roar that cut right through the sound of my game, even with my headphones on. It went on for a solid 4 or 5 minutes, and it was starting to get on my nerves, but I was also getting a little concerned. I paused my game and slid off the couch, creeping over to the side window that looked out towards their house. All their lights were off, which meant my neighbors were probably either out for the night or already asleep. The barking was definitely coming from inside their house. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw a figure walking quickly through their front yard. It was a man, dressed in dark clothing, and I couldn't make out his face. He cut across their lawn, stepped onto the sidewalk, and walked briskly down the street, disappearing into the night. As soon as he was gone, Rocky stopped barking. I figured the dog had just been barking at him walking by, and feeling reassured, I went back to my game. Another hour and a half went by. It was close to midnight now, and I was starting to feel the day catching up to me. I was in the middle of a tense match when I heard a distinct knocking sound. It made me jump. I assumed it was the front door and was instantly annoyed. Who would be knocking on someone's door at this hour? I couldn't pause my game, so I tried to ignore it, but the knocking continued, persistent and firm. When the match finally ended, I took my headphones off to listen more closely. The house was dead quiet, and then the knocking came again. 3 loud raps. But I realized it wasn't coming from the front door. It was coming from the sliding glass door in the back of the house, the one that led to our dark, fenced-in backyard. My blood ran cold. There was absolutely no reason for anyone to be at my back door at midnight. My initial annoyance was replaced with a wave of pure dread. My first thought was to go look, but then I stopped myself. What if it was the same guy I saw in my neighbor's yard? I decided the smartest thing to do was to stay completely silent. If they thought no one was home, maybe they would just leave. All the lights downstairs were off, except for the glow of the TV screen, and the blinds were all closed. I sat there on the couch, not moving a muscle, my heart pounding in my chest. After another minute of silence, I convinced myself they were gone, and, like a stupid teenager, I put my headphones back on and started another game. I played until my eyes felt like they were full of sand. It was almost 2 in the morning when I finally admitted defeat. I shut off the console and the TV, plunging the living room into total darkness. I trudged upstairs, my body aching with fatigue, and got into bed. I had just closed my eyes when I heard a new sound, one that was completely out of place. It was the soft crunch of tires rolling slowly over the gravel at the end of our driveway. I sat bolt upright in bed, my senses on high alert. The car didn't continue down the road. It stopped right in front of my garage. I slipped out of bed and crept to my window, peering through a crack in the blinds. I saw a dark-colored sedan parked at the foot of my driveway. The driver's side door opened, and a figure got out. I couldn't see them clearly, but I heard their footsteps as they walked up the driveway and then disappeared around the side of the house towards the backyard. A shiver of pure terror went through me. This was real. I ran back to my bed, grabbed my phone, and hid in my closet, dialing 911. I whispered to the operator, telling her someone was trying to get into my house. She told me officers were on their way, but could be 10 minutes. While I was still on the phone, I heard a faint metallic scraping from the back door downstairs, followed by a soft click. The lock had been picked. The door slid open. I held my breath, listening to the intruders step inside. Their footsteps were quiet as they moved into the living room. I could hear them taking things, the sound of my gaming console being unplugged, drawers in the entertainment center being pulled open. They moved quickly and efficiently, going from the living room to the dining room, then into the kitchen. After a few minutes, I heard them go back out the door. For a split second, I felt a wave of relief. They were leaving. But then I heard their car door open and close, and a moment later, the footsteps were coming back to the house. They had just dropped off the first load and were coming back for more. At that point, I deeply regretted not making any noise, not letting them know someone was home. This person was confident, moving through my house like they owned it. I stayed hidden in my closet, listening to them rummage through the downstairs rooms again. And then I heard the one sound I had been dreading most, the creak of the bottom step of the staircase. They were coming upstairs. I could hear each slow, deliberate footstep as they ascended. They went straight for my parents' bedroom, which was right next to mine. I heard them in there for what felt like an eternity, opening drawers, rustling through my mom's jewelry box. Then the footsteps came out into the hallway and stopped directly in front of my bedroom door. The handle began to turn, slowly and silently. It stopped when it hit the lock. There was a pause. I could feel their presence on the other side of the door. I held my breath, certain they were about to kick the door in. But then, the handle turned back. The footsteps immediately turned and moved quickly back down the stairs and out of the house. A few seconds later, I heard the car start and speed away down the street. It was over. When the police finally arrived, they found that my console, my dad's laptop, and a bunch of other electronics were gone. They figured the thief saw my locked door and realized someone was home, and it scared them off. I'm just thankful they didn't try to open that door, because I have no idea what would have happened if they had seen me. Back in the summer of 2022, when I was 16, my entire world felt like it had been turned upside down. My parents had decided to move us out of the familiar suburban neighborhood where I'd grown up and into an older, single-story ranch house on a large plot of land just outside Asheville, North Carolina. The house itself was nice enough, but it was surrounded by dense woods on three sides, and our nearest neighbor was a quarter-mile down a long gravel road. The isolation felt suffocating. To make matters infinitely worse, just a month after we moved in, our family dog, Buddy, a sweet, lumbering golden retriever I'd had since I was a little kid, passed away from old age. Buddy had been more than a pet. He was my constant shadow, my furry guardian. In our old house, whenever my parents went out, I never felt truly alone because Buddy was always there, sleeping at the foot of my bed or lying on the rug by the front door. His presence was a comfort, a steady, warm beat in the house's rhythm. Now, in this new strange house, the silence he left behind was deafening and terrifying. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside my window, sent a jolt of anxiety through me. That summer, with school out and my parents back at work, I was left alone in the house for most of the day. The layout was simple but unsettling. When you walked in the front door, you were in a large open-plan living room and kitchen area. To the left was a long, narrow hallway that felt like a dark tunnel. My bedroom was the first door on the right. A spare guest room was across from it, and at the very end of the hall was my parents' bedroom. For some reason, I hated seeing the open doorways along that hallway. They looked like dark, gaping mouths, and my imagination would always picture someone standing just inside, watching me. So, I developed a ritual. Every morning, after my parents left, the very first thing I would do was walk down that hallway and close every single door. I wasn't just pushing them shut. I was making sure the latch engaged fully, listening for that satisfying solid click that meant the door was secure. It was a small thing, but it helped ease my mounting paranoia. On this particular day, about a week after we had lost Buddy, I did my usual routine. I closed my door, the guest room door, and then I walked to the end of the hall and pulled my parents' heavy oak door shut. I remember distinctly pushing it firmly until I heard that loud click of the lock setting into the frame. Satisfied, I went back to my room, closed my own door, and tried to lose myself in the digital world. I put on my noise-canceling headphones, logged into a video chat with my best friend, and spent the next 2 hours talking, laughing, and watching stupid videos online. It was a good distraction, a bubble of normalcy in a house that felt anything but normal. Around 11, my friend had to go, and I took off my headphones, suddenly plunged back into the profound silence of the house. My stomach rumbled, so I decided to head to the kitchen for an early lunch. I opened my bedroom door and stepped into the hallway, turning right toward the living room. But something immediately felt wrong. A cold draft was coming from the end of the hall, and in my peripheral vision, something was out of place. I stopped dead and slowly turned my head to look down the hallway. My blood ran cold. The door to my parents' bedroom, the one I knew for an absolute fact I had securely closed, was now standing wide open. Not just ajar, but fully open, pushed all the way back against the interior wall, revealing the dark, unlit space of their room. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, completely frozen, my ears straining for any sound, any tiny clue that I wasn't alone. Nothing. Just the low hum of the air conditioner and the frantic thumping of my own heart in my chest. My first instinct was to run, to get out of the house and call my dad. But a part of me, a stupid, curious part, needed to know what was going on. What if it was just the wind? But there were no windows open in the house. What if the latch was broken? But I'd heard it click. There was no rational explanation. I backed up slowly into the kitchen, my eyes still locked on that dark doorway at the end of the hall. My hand searched the countertop behind me until it found the wooden knife block. I pulled out the largest chef's knife, its weight feeling both ridiculous and necessary in my trembling hand. Holding the knife out in front of me like some kind of B-movie hero, I began a slow, terrifying sweep of the house. I checked behind the couch in the living room, in the small coat closet by the front door, even under the dining room table. Every shadow seemed to hold a human shape. Every creak of the floorboards under my own feet sounded like someone else's footstep. The house was clear. That just left the hallway. My heart was hammering against my ribs as I crept down the long, narrow corridor. I checked the spare bedroom first, turning the knob with an agonizingly slow squeak. The room was empty, the bed neatly made, exactly as my mom had left it. I backed out, pulling the door shut behind me, listening for the click. Now, there was only one room left. I stood in the doorway of my parents' bedroom, peering into the gloom. I could see their large bed and the dresser against the far wall. Nothing seemed out of place. I took a hesitant step inside, the knife held tight in my fist. As my eyes adjusted to the lower light, I noticed something on the light beige carpet near the window. Small, dark clumps of dirt and a few damp, crumpled leaves, as if someone had come in from outside. My mom was meticulous about keeping the house clean. She would never have left a mess like that. My gaze shifted from the floor to the ensuite bathroom door, which was closed. It was the only place left for someone to be hiding. Just as I was about to call out, I heard a sound from inside the bathroom. It was a soft, distinct shuffle, like the sound of a rubber-soled shoe shifting on tile. Someone was in there. A wave of pure terror washed over me, so intense it made me feel nauseous. I didn't scream or say a word. I just started backing out of the bedroom, my eyes fixed on that closed bathroom door. I had just cleared the bedroom doorway and was back in the hall when I heard another sound, louder this time. The unmistakable squeal of the bathroom window being slid open, followed by a heavy thud on the soft ground outside. I didn't wait to investigate. I bolted. I ran through the living room, fumbled with the deadbolt on the front door, and sprinted out onto the gravel driveway, not stopping until I was at the edge of the road. I called my dad, my voice a hysterical, sobbing mess. He told me he was on his way and to call 911 immediately. The police arrived before my parents, their presence a massive relief. They found the bathroom window wide open, its screen lying on the ground outside. There were clear footprints in the damp soil under the window, leading away from the house and disappearing into the dense woods. Nothing in the house was stolen. Not a single thing was out of place other than the dirt on the carpet and the open doors. The police figured it was likely a transient who had been looking for a place to hide out during the day and had been just as scared of me as I was of them. But I don't believe that. The way they hid, the silence, the patience. It felt like they were watching me, waiting for something. I never felt safe in that house again, and I spent the rest of that summer counting the days until we moved. It was late 2023, and I was living by myself in a modest 2-story house in a quiet suburb of Portland, Oregon. I'm a graphic designer, so I have the luxury of working from home most days, which means I've become intimately familiar with every single sound my house makes. I know the groan of the water pipes when the heat kicks on, the specific way the floorboards creak on the second floor when the temperature drops, and the gentle hum of the refrigerator in the dead of night. These were the normal sounds of my home, the sounds that meant everything was okay. But one Tuesday evening in November, a new sound introduced itself, and it was anything but normal. The day had been long and tedious, filled with endless client revisions and looming deadlines. By about 7 in the evening, I finally shut my laptop and trudged downstairs, my mind numb from staring at a screen for 10 hours straight. The rain that had been threatening all day was finally coming down, a steady drumming against the roof and windows that usually made me feel cozy and safe. I decided to make myself some pasta, a simple comfort meal to cap off a draining day. As I stood at the stove, stirring a pot of simmering tomato sauce, I heard it for the first time. It was a faint, dry scratching noise coming from somewhere above me. It was short, lasting only a few seconds, and I initially dismissed it as a tree branch scraping against the roof in the wind. I glanced out the kitchen window, but the trees in my yard were still, their branches heavy and motionless under the weight of the rain. I shrugged it off and continued with my cooking. I drained the pasta, mixed it with the sauce, and sat down at my small dining table to eat. I had just taken my first bite when the sound came again, a little louder this time. It wasn't a random scrape. It had a distinct rhythmic quality to it, like sandpaper being dragged methodically across an old wooden plank. Scratch, pause, scratch, pause. My fork hovered in midair as I strained to listen. It was definitely coming from upstairs. My first rational thought was that a squirrel or maybe a raccoon had somehow managed to get into the attic. It was an old house, and I knew there were probably small openings I wasn't aware of. While the thought of a wild animal in my attic was annoying, it wasn't particularly frightening. It was just another homeowner problem I'd have to deal with. After I finished eating, the sound had stopped, and I put it out of my mind for a while. I cleaned up the kitchen, then settled onto the couch in the living room to watch some Netflix. I was halfway through an episode of a show when the scratching started up again, this time more persistent than before. It was directly above the living room now, a constant, grating noise that was impossible to ignore. It was so aggravating that I couldn't even focus on what I was watching. My annoyance was slowly starting to curdle into a real sense of unease. The sound just didn't seem right for an animal. It was too deliberate, too consistent. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I muted the television, plunging the room into silence, save for the rain outside and the relentless scratching from my ceiling. The sound was clearer now, and it seemed to be moving, slowly making its way from the area above the living room toward the center of the house, right where the pull-down stairs to the attic were located in the upstairs hallway. That was it. I had to figure out what was going on. I grabbed a heavy Maglite flashlight from a kitchen drawer and headed upstairs, my frustration now tinged with a growing sense of dread. The second floor was dark, and I stood in the hallway for a full minute, just listening. Silence. The scratching had stopped the moment my feet hit the stairs. I flicked on the hallway light and stared at the square outline of the attic hatch on the ceiling. I really did not want to go up there, but I knew my imagination would run wild all night if I didn't. I pulled the cord, and the old wooden ladder unfolded with a loud groan, sending a puff of dust into the air. I took a deep breath, switched on my flashlight, and started to climb. The air in the attic was cold, musty, and thick with the smell of old wood and insulation. I swept the beam of my flashlight across the space. It was mostly empty, just some old boxes of holiday decorations, a dusty suitcase, and rolls of pink insulation covering the floor joists. There were no signs of any animals. No droppings, no nests, nothing disturbed. I walked carefully from one end of the attic to the other, my light cutting through the thick darkness. Everything was still and silent. I felt a little foolish, but also relieved. It must have just been the house settling in a weird way I'd never heard before. I went back downstairs, put the ladder away, and decided to call it a night. But before I went to bed, I decided to take one last look around outside, just to be sure there wasn't a branch hitting the roof that I had somehow missed. I put on a raincoat and my boots and stepped out into the cold, wet night. The rain had slowed to a light drizzle. I walked the full perimeter of my house, shining my powerful flashlight up at the roof from every angle. The tree branches were a good 10 feet away from the house on all sides. There was absolutely nothing that could be making that sound. Defeated and tired, I walked back toward my front door. As I reached the end of my driveway, something made me stop and look back at my house one last time. And that's when my heart dropped into my stomach. From the small half-moon window of the attic, the one facing the street, I saw a light. It was a faint, weak glimmer, like the light from a cell phone screen, and it was moving. It wasn't sweeping around like my flashlight had. It was moving slowly, methodically, as if someone was up there looking for something specific on the floor. I was completely frozen, standing in the rain, staring up at that window. Someone was in my attic. They had been up there the entire time I was making dinner. The entire time I was watching TV, and they had been silent as a ghost when I went up there to investigate. They had been just feet away from me in the darkness. My mind reeled. How long had they been there? What were they doing? I fumbled for my phone, my fingers slick with rain and shaking uncontrollably. I backed away slowly, never taking my eyes off the attic window, and hid behind my neighbor's large hedge, dialing 911. I whispered to the operator, trying to explain the situation without my voice cracking. As I was talking, the light in the attic window suddenly stopped moving. Then, it turned and shone directly down at the street, right where I had been standing just moments before. They had seen me. The light held there for a second before it was abruptly switched off, plunging the window back into darkness. A moment later, I heard a loud bang from inside my house, a sound so forceful it was clearly audible even from outside. It sounded like the attic hatch being thrown open and slamming against the ceiling. I told the operator what I heard, and she told me to stay hidden and that officers were just a few minutes away. Those few minutes felt like an eternity. I was crouched in the wet bushes, peering at my silent, dark house, imagining the person inside moving through my rooms, through my life. When the police cars finally arrived, their flashing blue and red lights felt like the most beautiful sight I've ever seen. I ran out to meet them, quickly explaining everything again. 2 officers drew their weapons and entered my house through the front door, which I had left unlocked in my haste. After they cleared the house, they brought me inside. The attic was empty, but they found clear signs that someone had been living up there. They found a sleeping bag rolled up in a corner, several empty water bottles, and a pile of granola bar wrappers. It looked like they had been there for at least a few days. The back door in my kitchen was unlocked and slightly ajar. That's how they had slipped out after hearing the sirens. On one of the wooden support beams, the police found a series of lines carved into the wood. They weren't just random scratches. They were tally marks, dozens of them, grouped in 5s. The police tried to reassure me, saying it was probably a couple of homeless teenagers just looking for a place to stay out of the rain. But that didn't make me feel any better. Someone had been living in my house, secretly, silently, just above my head, listening to my every move. I don't know what those tally marks meant, but I have a chilling feeling they were counting something. I haven't slept a full night since... My divorce was finalized in the winter of 2022. Sarah and the kids moved out, but I stayed behind in the house we had all shared. It was a big 5-bedroom place in a quiet suburb of Denver, the kind of house that's meant to be filled with the noise of a family. Now, it was just me, and the silence was a constant, heavy presence. The rooms felt cavernous and empty, and every little sound the house made seemed to be amplified tenfold. I got used to most of them. The groaning of the pipes in the walls, the hum of the fridge, and the peculiar thud the central air conditioning unit would make when it kicked on. It was a hollow, resonant sound that would travel up from the basement through the vents, a noise that I'd come to associate with the house simply breathing. At first, it was unsettling, but after a few months, it just became part of the background noise of my lonely existence. This particular night was a Thursday in early spring. The day had been brutal at the accounting firm where I work, a marathon of spreadsheets and client meetings that left my brain feeling like scrambled eggs. I got home late, around 8, and didn't even bother turning on the lights downstairs. I went straight up to my bedroom, which was the only room in the house that still felt like mine. I changed out of my suit and into an old t-shirt and sweatpants, collapsed onto the bed, and flicked on the TV. I wasn't even really watching it. I was just letting the noise fill the silence. I had been lying there for maybe half an hour, my eyes closed, just trying to unwind, when I heard that familiar thud from the basement. It was the AC, I thought, and didn't even open my eyes. I just continued to drift in that hazy state between wakefulness and sleep. Another hour passed. I hadn't managed to fall asleep, and my stomach was starting to complain. I swung my legs off the bed, figuring I'd go down and find some leftovers. I switched off the TV and opened my bedroom door, and at that exact moment, the thud sounded again. But this time, it felt sharper, closer. That was strange. I'd never heard it happen twice in such a short span of time, especially since I hadn't touched the thermostat. A sliver of annoyance cut through my exhaustion. I walked across the hall to the digital thermostat on the wall. The screen was blank. The system was completely off and had been all day. A cold knot began to form in my stomach. If the AC was off, what was making that noise? I tried to push the thought away, telling myself it was just some weird pressure change in the ducts. My first priority was food. I went downstairs to the kitchen and found some leftover spaghetti from the night before. I stood there, leaning against the counter and scrolling through my phone while it heated up in the microwave. Then it happened again. It was so loud this time that the floor vibrated beneath my feet. It wasn't a thud anymore. It was a heavy, deliberate bang, like someone had dropped a bowling ball on a concrete floor. This was the moment my annoyance curdled into genuine fear. I could no longer convince myself this was a quirk of the house. Other possibilities, ones I didn't want to entertain, started creeping into the edges of my mind. The microwave beeped, and I quickly ate the spaghetti, barely tasting it. My mind was racing. I knew I wouldn't be able to rest until I figured out what was making that sound. I had to go to the basement. I walked over to the basement door, my hand hesitating on the knob. I took a deep breath, opened it, and flipped on the light switch. A single bare bulb at the bottom of the wooden staircase illuminated a large, unfinished space with concrete walls and floor. Old furniture was covered in white sheets like a graveyard of forgotten memories, and cardboard boxes filled with holiday decorations and old baby clothes were stacked against the walls. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and dust. I walked down the creaking wooden steps, each one seeming to announce my presence to the shadows. At the bottom, I turned toward the far corner where the furnace and a AC unit stood. I wasn't a handyman, so I had no idea what I was looking for, but I scanned the unit for anything obviously broken or out of place. Nothing. The unit was completely silent, completely still. There was no power running to it at all. It couldn't have been the source of the noise. My heart sank. That meant the sound was coming from something else, something I couldn't explain. I gave up and turned to go back upstairs, planning on just locking the door and dealing with it in the morning. As I started to walk back towards the stairs, my eyes scanned the gloomy space one last time, and then I saw him. He was crouched in the deep shadows directly underneath the staircase, tucked behind a stack of old boxes. The light from the single bulb didn't quite reach him, but it was just bright enough to catch the faint reflection from his wide, staring eyes. They were locked directly on me. He was completely still, a dark shape folded into the darkness. We stared at each other for what felt like a lifetime. In that moment, my brain stopped working. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I just stood there, frozen, a dozen feet away from a stranger who was hiding in my basement. He knew I'd seen him. The silent standoff was broken when he made a slight, almost imperceptible shift, as if getting ready to stand up. That single movement shattered my paralysis. I turned and sprinted up the stairs, my feet pounding on the wood. I didn't look back. I slammed the heavy wooden door shut, fumbled with the deadbolt until it clicked into place, and then, in a surge of pure panic, I grabbed one of the heavy dining room chairs and wedged it under the doorknob. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. I kept my voice as low and steady as I could, explaining that there was a man in my basement. I stood with my back pressed against the wall next to the door, listening, terrified he would try to break it down. But there was no sound of him following me. The dispatcher told me officers were 5 minutes out. Just as she said that, the banging started again. It was coming from the basement, a series of heavy, rhythmic blows. He was hitting something over and over with incredible force. It sounded like metal on concrete, a brutal, echoing clamor that filled the entire house. I stayed on the line with the dispatcher, describing the sounds, my heart pounding in time with the impacts from below. After about a minute of this, it suddenly went silent again. Moments later, I saw the flashing lights of a police cruiser sweep across my living room window. When the officers came to the door, I unlocked it and they entered, guns drawn. They quickly cleared the main floor before heading for the basement. They found the man almost immediately. He gave up without a fight. He was a surprisingly ordinary-looking man, maybe in his 40s, with clean clothes and a well-groomed haircut. He looked more like a suburban dad than a home invader. The police brought up the tools he'd been using, a thick 3-foot-long crowbar and a heavy sledgehammer. After they had him secured in the car, one of the officers took me down to the basement to show me what he had been doing. In the far corner, opposite the furnace, the concrete wall was a mess of rubble and splintered wood. Embedded in the wall was a small, old-fashioned safe, its thick steel door horribly dented and mangled from the force of the sledgehammer. He had been trying to break it open. The funny thing is, I knew the safe was there. The previous owner had mentioned it, but I had never used it. As far as I knew, it was completely empty. The officer told me it was a common tactic for burglars in this area to target these older, larger homes, assuming they had valuables stashed away in old wall safes. This man had likely been watching my house, knew I lived alone, and took his chance. The thudding I'd heard was him, initially trying to pry the safe out of the wall with the crowbar. He had hidden under the stairs when he heard me coming. Knowing that anyone, even someone who looks completely normal, could be capable of something like this has deeply unsettled me. I'm putting the house on the market next week. It's too big, and it holds too many memories, both good and bad. I need a smaller place, somewhere I can feel safe again.